Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Mayo. I'm the technical evangelist for the Unified Communications Platform, and we've got tons of stuff to cover today. So I wanted to get started right exactly on time. I've got what I think is the perfect combination of elements to create a great PDC session. First, I've got the first session on the first day right after the first keynote, so everybody's fresh and excited and ready to dive into the PDC. I've got a minimum of slides, a maximum of demos, and then some free stuff to give away at the end of the session. So I feel like I've got the chemistry right for all of us to have a great time this morning. Curiosity-wise, how many folks are building on the Unified Communications Platform today? So raise of hands. Fantastic. So about double of what we saw last year. We saw that last week in Europe at TechEd Europe as well. And how many folks are building client-side communication solutions with the Office Communicator Automation API? Okay. Client-side communications built with the UCCA, the API that we use to create Communicator? Okay. How many folks are doing server-side stuff with UCMA? Okay. Perfect. Okay, great. So last year at PDC 08, we walked through the R2 platform, so the stuff that was shipping with OCS 2007 R2 and Communicator 2007 R2 and all the SDKs, and then we reserved about 15 minutes to talk about the platform futures. In this session today, we are actually going to be showing you those bits. So we kind of talked about what we wanted to do and so on and so forth, along with your feedback over the past year with our early adopter program, Metro, that I'll talk about at the end of the talk, getting your feedback, iterating on some of the ideas and the focus and so on. We'll actually be showing you the brand new platform that's going to ship with OCS 14, OC 14. We've also got some really cool demos and some code to show along with Exchange 2010. So completely new client-side platform, largely revamped server-side platform to not only expose some of the new features of OCS 14, but also to make some of the things that you might be doing today much easier, so fewer lines of code. And then, again, showing some of this Exchange code that you can use to use both the data as well as the services or business logic from Exchange within your application. Okay? So without further ado, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. We'll actually cover what's new in UC Wave 14, give you a general idea of what we're going to be shipping in the products. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there because we're developers. We want to talk platform, so I'm going to focus most of my time there. We'll talk first about integrating and extending Office Communicator 14. So how do I either leverage communications features from Communicator within my app, integrating, or extending? How do I take features or data from my applications and integrate those into the communications experience of Communicator, again, to add some value from my app into the communications experience? Once we talk about that, we'll shift over to the server side, and we'll talk again about integrating and extending. We'll talk about how do I integrate server-side communications into my business logic or into my business processes with UCMA 3.0, and then how do I extend the communications abilities of OCS 14 by using UCMA 3.0 core, again, to extend what's out of the box to provide some sort of value on top of what OCS does as a server. Lastly, we'll talk about Exchange 2010. So Exchange 2010 and the Exchange Web Services Managed API 1.0 were released last week at TechEd Europe. We'll talk about the opportunity for creating solutions on top of that API or using that API. And then we'll wrap up with talking about the roadmap, what's going to happen when, what's the opportunity to do early adoption work. We'll talk about early adopter programs and some other opportunities there as well. And then plenty of time for questions, some stuff to give away. Like I said, I wanted to start on time because we've got plenty to talk about. So this is not going to be a product demo talk. I'm not going to do end-to-end demos and glitzy hand waving and stuff like that. This is a developer talk, so we're going to talk about the platform. But I want to just briefly mention what we're going to be doing in OCS 14 and OC 14, just so you as a developer have an idea of what's going to be coming, so you can be comfortable that building on top of this platform, either packaged software or within your enterprise, your organization, that this thing is going to be widely deployed and widely used, so you know that target platform is going to be there. So how many folks are using Windows 7 today? Fantastic. And why? Well, it's a really compelling OS. This concept of fewer clicks and ease of use as far as getting at features. It just feels very, very natural, like hovering over a running application to get a peek at it, and then getting within one click, like hovering over Zune and being able to pause music, or being able to see all the open Internet Explorer windows you have, so you can easily get back to the one that you need to go back to, or being able to hover over the little icon for wireless networks to see all the network options that you have available to you. Well, that ease of use and that fewer clicks experience is what we're bringing to the software experience of Communicator 14. So as we'll see here in a couple of minutes within the demo, you can get at the most common features of Communicator just with one click, that same kind of Windows 7 experience. You can hover over a contact, get details about the contact, and click on the icon to call them just with one click, right? So this ease of use is one of the core pillars of 14, making it even easier from a software perspective for people to communicate. So making their communications much more efficient, much more expedient, and so on. The other pillar of what we're doing in 14 is really focusing on TCO. So being able to go to an enterprise and say, hey, we're not only going to make your people more productive by making the communications that they use to live their professional life day in, day out easier, but we're also going to do it at a lower TCO, because we're going to finally give you an opportunity to rip out your PBX and take that separate hardware and separate network and separate set of skills and just reinvest into the existing set of skills that you have today, as far as maintaining your IP network and maintaining just another Windows server like Exchange. Now you're maintaining OCS for all of your IM, your voice, your video conferencing, your web conferencing, and so on. But for us as developers, and where I'm going to spend all of my time today, or we're going to spend all of our time today, is really focusing on the platform. So if I've got this software-based communication experience on the client, and I've got this software infrastructure for communications on the server, all that's great as far as ease of use and lower TCO and making people more productive at a lower cost and so on and so forth. But for us as developers, what we really care about is, how can I treat that software as a platform, right? What are the opportunities either on the client side or on the server side, or a combination of both, to build communications into my solutions, right? And what value can I add to the software that I create every day? Okay, so let's talk about client-side communication scenarios. So I contribute to a program called Metro. It's an early adopter program that we run out of Developer Platform Evangelism, the team that puts on the PDC. And of course, we focus on OCS, Communicator, and Exchange. And we did an early adopter program for the R2 wave and collected lots and lots of feedback. And through the technical briefings that I do and the time that I spend with different companies and so on, I've heard very, very common themes of scenarios. And here's some of those themes. So people will come to me and we'll sit down to talk about a meeting, and they'll bring up Outlook and the integration of presence, right? The little presence bubbles on the to and the from line, and the ability to launch a call directly from Outlook. And they'll say, I want to build this, right? I want to have the same kind of integration that Communicator has with Outlook. I want to build that into my own app. So people can launch communications directly from my app. They don't have to minimize my application and leave my application to go start doing some calls and then eventually come back to my app. I want to integrate that communication into the work stream that they do with my application. So finding contacts, leveraging presence, launching communications. Another thing that we heard quite often throughout that early adopter program is, hey, I want to extend the Office Communicator 14, or extend the Office Communicator communications just like you guys do with Outlook, right? So when you embed that little link on the receiving side that says, hey, this is an ongoing conversation, click this link, and then everybody that receives the invitation to join the call or the IM conversation that was launched from Outlook gets the opportunity to look at the email that was used to launch that call, right? So everybody on the call, let's say 10 people or somebody launches a call from an Outlook email. Every person that's on the receiving side actually gets an opportunity to look at that email, then we're all on the same page. We're all talking about, we all know the context behind that call. So again, that's another common scenario that we heard during this early adopter program is that, hey, I want to take that same concept. So there's data in my conversation, and when I launch the call, I want consumers of the call or receivers of the call to be able to take that information and be able to access it very quickly. So, if I'm in my CRM application, I launch a call about a particular customer record with the account team. When everyone receives that call, I want them to be able to launch my app or very quickly be able to see that CRM record so everybody's on the same page and we can just not spend time finding the information to have the conversation. We can just have the conversation. Another common theme, hey, I want to extend communicator. Right? So how you guys, Microsoft, you have that little link to OneNote so you can link notes to a conversation or launch the live meeting console for a Meet Now opportunity. Talk a lot to companies that say, hey, I want my application to sit right here. So from the communicator experience, if they want to use my app, it's just one click away. Okay? So it's demo time. Let's look at some of these opportunities that you're going to have within the 14 wave to do this kind of integration and extension within your own apps. Okay, so I'm going to log into my demo environment here. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a very simple CRM application that I want to use to kind of reinforce some of these discussions that we've had in the first couple of slides. So here you can see is the Fabricam & Company CRM application. It's a WPF application. It's very, very simple from a CRM perspective, but very, very sophisticated from a communications experience perspective. So you can see here that I've got the Office 2010 contact card here for the local signed-in user. This is Sean Chai. You can see here if I show Communicator 14 and change his presence, you can see that's reflected within the application. Right, and so as I use Communicator, it's of course my presence is reflected within the application. I can see all my information, for a particular contact with this contact card, including their organization and so on. I've got the integration of the Communicator contact list here directly within the application. Right, so if I again show Communicator, you can see the UC team here with Pilar and Rebecca and Andy, and you can see it's reflected here in my application. So I've actually integrated the contact list within my app. All right, let me just go wake up Rebecca so she shows online. Oh, looks like she's been away from her machine for too long. Oops. Okay. You can see it's reflecting the presence of Rebecca. Maybe Rebecca's really, really sleepy. I must have set her status to away when I was practicing my demos earlier today. So there you go. And you can see, Rebecca from the list. You can see her hover card, right? See here all her phone numbers based on your ability to see her presence based on access level, organization, so on. I can right-click, and then I have, one-click access to all of these different opportunities for communication, contact group management, and so on. You can see here I can remove her from this group. And you can see over here when I go back to Communicator that these aren't just read-only representations. If I go to the help desk team that I removed her from, these aren't just read-only representations. What I'm doing in these controls within my app are actually, I'm actually exposing the feature of the real contact list within my app, right? So if I add, if I go back over here and add Rebecca back to that particular team, it'll be updated in Communicator and so on. So I can copy the contact to the help desk team and go back to Communicator, and you can see she's back there, okay? I could do cool things like search for Rebecca, right? And once I find Rebecca, if I wanted to communicate with her, I can launch the hover card and just start an IM conversation. Right? So that integration of presence and contact information and so on directly from my application. Okay? And then I can also do, when we talked about that Outlook type integration, if I go over here and start looking at accounts and select general industries, you can see I have information about the account, right? I also have a team list, so the entire account team. I'm showing the presence for everybody that works with this associated account, and this is a custom contact list. These contacts might not even be in my contact list. I can see the account manager, right, and her presence with the little tic-tac control, and then if I want to communicate with that contact directly, I can do so just by hovering over the contact, right? So if you look at Communicator 14 and then look at the integration of both the look and feel and the features within my application, you can see I'm starting to integrate these different aspects of Communicator 14 directly into my app, right? Again, integrating communication opportunities, the opportunity to consume presence, find contacts, launch communications directly from my app. Well, how did I do that? Well, last year at the PDC, we talked about WPF and Silverlight controls that'll essentially decompose Communicator so you can integrate Communicator look and feel as well as features directly into your app. Well, those are the Office Communicator 14 controls. They're WPF and Silverlight controls that essentially give you the opportunity to treat Communicator like a bunch of Lego blocks that you can plug into your application. So you can integrate Office Communicator 14 UI and features with little to no code, just some XAML, and then passing a SIP URI to the contact card or a bunch of SIP URIs to that custom contact list control, and then Communicator and OCS do the rest as far as doing the presence subscription and publication and all that different stuff. So it provides the expected developer and designer experience as far as templatization and so on. So you can make it look like the rest of your application so it integrates seamlessly with your UX or your user experience. This is now fully supported. We used to have some WPF samples within on our developer center on MSDN, but they were exactly that. They were samples that you had to support yourself. They're now fully supported, no longer a sample. They can be extended and built upon. Like a lot of things in our platform, we have the opportunity to give you some features and functionality very quickly, but give you the opportunity to further customize it or extend it. And we'll talk about how you can do that here in a couple slides using the Office Communicator 14 Managed API. Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about when we talk about that Managed API is that the Communicator controls and the Communicator Managed API actually leverage the endpoint, the OCS endpoint associated with Communicator. And we do this really to simplify the development experience for you guys. So you don't run into this thing that we ran into with UCCA where I had to manage my own endpoint, and when an incoming call came in, I had to decide, between my application and Communicator who was actually going to show the toast, like who was responsible for showing the toast and answering the call and all that stuff. So what we do is we actually reuse the Communicator endpoint, so it's incredibly, almost brutally easy to use these controls and use the Communicator library to build these features into your applications, okay? So what do we support as far as the developer tool set and target framework and so on? Well, we support Visual Studio 2010 as well as 2008. We're supporting Expression 3.0 from a designer experience. And then from a target version of the framework, we're building to 3.5 and Silverlight 3.0, but through that Russian doll model, we'll support 4.0 of both those target frameworks. So you'll be able to be a little future-proof there in moving forward with these platforms. So as we saw in the demo there, we provide controls for those really common scenarios that we heard from people when we were doing that Metro program. So finding contacts, there's a contact list, which is just, I'm taking the Communicator contact list and showing it in my app. The custom contact list, hey, I have a list of people in an account team, or I have people that work on this particular website or something along those lines. The custom contact list gives you the opportunity to build a contact list based on data in your application or based on information in your application. And then that search input and search results controls gives you the opportunity to do contact search, either based on name or based on keyword, and build out in your application. Once you've found the contacts that you want to display, you can display their presence either in the base contact list control or custom contact list, or show that full contact card or hover card in your application. When I hovered over one of the presence, one of the presence controls, you saw that pop up and so on. And then that tiny tic-tac control, which, keeping with the candy theme, replaces the jelly bean control, right? So now it's a little square guy. So that presence availability indicator is that control. And then finally, we have the opportunity to just out of the box, 2 controls, start instant messaging conversation and start audio conversation, just so you can launch calls just by dropping those controls into your app, and it'll launch based on a SIP URI that you pass it. Okay, so let me go back over to the demo machine. There we go. And actually, I'm going to skip the step of actually showing you taking the control and assigning it a SIP URI because, I mean, it's like fall off the log easy. So I think we'll spend our time in other places within the app. So one of the things that I wanted to show here, we had talked about folks asking, how do I build that communicator experience or that Outlook communicator experience where I launch the call from Outlook and it includes context from my app within the communications experience. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to click on this little instant messaging control here that I've actually extended. And you can see here when I launch the IM conversation, he said, waiting for an interesting pause from his demo. So let's try that again. Did I mention the fact that I'm running on alpha code, pre-alpha code? I should probably mention that now, so everyone gives me a little bit of a breathing room on my demo. Let's make sure that Rebecca's awake and available. Okay, let's try this again. And oh, that's tragic. Oh, there was my conversation. So it just happened to be in the background. So let's launch it again, and I'll be a little bit more patient this time. I'll take a full breath before I wonder what's going on. OK, so here's my application. I'm going to go over to General Industries, select it, and I can see the account team. I can see the account manager. Let's make sure that she's available. OK, and then I'm going to launch the call. OK, and you can see here when I launch this IM conversation that I've included the fact that the subject of the conversation is General Industries. That's the account that I was talking about. I included this little bit of IM in the conversation. Do you have a moment to discuss the General Industries account? Right? And if we go over to Rebecca's machine, which I have over in this remote desktop, you can see here that on the receiving side, she gets the subject, so she knows, OK, this is about General Industries. And then, hey, do you have a moment to discuss the General Industries account? And then you can see here that she has a link. And it says here, a contextual link has been provided with this conversation. And it says under that, if the link below looks suspicious, do not click on it. We'll talk about how we secure those links with application packages here in a second. But I've got a link to the application, right, that I could click on this, and it could optionally open the application on my side. I could extend the conversation window to include just a short snapshot of the data and so on. We actually don't have this working in the WPF controls, but we've got another session here tomorrow at 11:30. David Ollison's going to go through doing this with Silverlight, so he'll be able to show you the end-to-end experience. Let me actually go back over to the slides, and let's talk about how I did that, so how I integrated that context into my application, or into my communication. So when I talk about extending the communications experience, I do that with this new Office Communicator 14 managed API. So it's a totally new managed API from the ground up that we built, again, to provide you really a good combination of productivity balanced with power. So if you developed anything with the iMessenger automation API in the past, that was a great API, despite the fact that it was COM. And of course, we fixed that because it's a managed API now. But it was a great API from the standpoint that it was really easy to get things up and running very quickly. Like, I could consume presence from a contact for just a few lines of code. I could start a conversation with like 10 lines of code, right? So it was very, very powerful. But there was a ceiling there, right? So I'd have folks that started developing with the iMessenger API and come back and say, hey, I want to be able to get an event anytime a new IM comes into this conversation. And I'd have to tell them, well, you're going to need UCCA for that, the API that we use to to build Communicator, and you're going to have to register your own endpoint and da-da-da-da-da. It was very, very complex. Well, we've actually fixed that, that balance of ease of use versus power within this API. So not only do you get full access, you get a new API called the UI Automation API that gives you the ease of use of iMessenger, right, in managed code, but we also support the full object model of Communicator. Think about like peeling off the skin or opening the black box of Communicator and having this full class library that exposes like contacts and conversation and so on. So we give you both the productivity that you used to get in the iMessenger API with the power of the UCCA API without all the complexity, like you don't need your own endpoint and so on. And I'll be able to show that to you here in a second with this demo. So the object model we support, there's two entry points. One is UI automation, which is, hey, I just want to start a conversation, so I say UI automation.startConversation, and I'm off to the races. There's also UCCA client, which exposes the object model of Office Communicator 14. So if you want to asynchronously manage the entire conversation lifetime and pick the modalities and pick the participants and track events over the lifetime of that conversation and so on, you have full access to the object model of Communicator, and you can access that through UC client, right? You can access contact information, contact groups you can manipulate, and so on. And if you think about the controls that we showed earlier in that demo, they're actually built on top of this API. That'll give you kind of an idea of all the different features and functionality you can access through this model API as well as the UI automation API. Again, we reuse the Office Communicator 14 endpoint, so you don't have to worry about endpoint management and kind of, hey, who's supposed to deal with this incoming call kind of a deal. And again, we support the same platform they support with the controls, again, because these controls are built, or those controls are built on top of this API. So as an example of that, let's go back over to this machine, and let me just show you quickly the code that I used to launch that call. And again, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how easy it is. Let's close all these windows. How easy it is to launch a conversation that includes context from your application. Okay? So I've got access to a class called UI Automation, right? And that automates Communicator on my local machine. I want to launch a call that includes data like I want to set the context or the title of the conversation. I want to include some IM and have that IM sent right away. I want to include a context link, and then I want to provide the unique Communicator ID of my application, so on the receiving side, the application knows what to do with that information. Well, this is how I do that. I create a list of type UI automation conversation context, and I pass it a bunch of enum values to say that I want to specify the context subject. I want to specify the context first instant message. I want to send the first instant message immediately at the initiation of the call. I want to include a context link, and I want to include the application ID that specifies what application was used to launch that conversation. I then have another list of type object called context data that I populate with all the information, like the account name from my application classes, a string for that, do you have a moment to discuss that account, whether I want to send the instant message right away, and so on. Okay? And then I just call UI automation.startConversation. I specify the modality, right? So here I'm just going to do instant messaging. I specify the participants. So if I pass one participant, it's a one-to-one call. If I pass many, it's a conference, right? And OCS does that for me automatically. And then I pass the context, specifying the context and the context data that I use as context to that conversation. And that's it, right? So that's the sending side. All right, where on the sending side, I call UI automation.startConversation. I can specify the modality as far as IM, audio, video. We now support app sharing directly from the API, as well as the ability to send a file transfer when you start the conversation. We support conversation window docking that we'll actually show in David's session tomorrow at 11:30. where you can take the window and upon launch or upon receipt, actually take that window and dock it within your own application window so it looks seamlessly integrated, where you don't have windows on top of windows. You can move the app around and the conversation sticks with it and stuff like that. And then that contextual data collaboration, so being able to send data from my app, application data, hyperlinks, things along those lines, along with that conversation launch. So that's the send side. What happens on the receive side? So how do I interpret that data that goes along with the conversation, right, in order to represent it or present it in some way on the receiving side? Just like Outlook, provides that link, and when I click on that link, it brings up the original mail, right? That same kind of relationship. Well, on the receive side, what you actually do is register what's called an Office Communicator 14 application package. And you can do this either at design time via the registry or at runtime using OCOM. And that application package essentially registers with Communicator what applications it trusts and what action to take when that trusted application sends data, right? So based on the app ID and the app data that you send, what should Communicator do with that information? And you have a couple of options depending on the scenario that you're trying to support, whether the user has that application on their machine, on the receiving machine, and so on. So one option is application launch. So just like with Outlook, you click that link, it brings up the email, right? You can do the same kind of a thing where you can register to have the application, like my CRM application, launched and take them to that screen. So take them to the general industry screen so they can say, when they receive the call, it's like, hey, Chris, I see you're calling about general industries. I've got the account right here. What did you want to talk about, right? Another option is the conversation window extension, where you can take the Communicator conversation window itself and extend it with a Silverlight application. So you register that, hey, upon receipt of this call, I want to load this Silverlight application at this URL. And not only do you have access to your Silverlight application, but through the Silverlight Office Communicator managed API libraries, you have access to the application data, so you can present that within your application. You have access to the participant list. You have access to the conversations. If you want to add modalities or do different things to the conversation over time, you have access to all of that information. Okay? And David's going to show that in his session tomorrow. Okay, so another thing that we had heard as far as feedback was, hey, I want to integrate my app or my widget into OC14. So how do I do that? Well, we have a custom contact list action menu that you can extend, as well as the right click. And that's in both the contact list as well as the contact card. And when you invoke either of these options, it will give you the list of SIP URIs that were selected when you SIP URI or SIP URIs, if there were multiple, that were selected when you took that action. The other thing that we support, this was another common scenario that we heard from customers, is that they'd say, hey, I've got this opportunity to build a communications client, but it's not really something that lends itself well to Communicator. Like, hey, I want to have like an application or a machine that sits in my lobby and greets people. So when they walk up and say, I have a meeting with Chris Mayo at 3:30, or I have a meeting with Chris Mayo at 3:30, it can sense my presence, find me, call me, and connect me with the person so I can say, hey, I'm going to be right down, right? Not really a great opportunity for Communicator, right? Because you don't want somebody that's going to be logged in there, and you don't want to show them the Communicator UI. You probably want to show some very simple, like big button kind of a UI. Well, in situations where Communicator might not be the right client, you have this Office Communicator Managed API, which is UI-less, so you can build your own Communicator experience and decide how you want to present that communications type or driven application. Okay? So one last demo over here on the demo machine, just to kind of prove that point. So I have full access to the communications model, or the Communicator model within my application. And to prove that, we just had a simple example here. So here are some of the calls that I've been launching over the course of the day through my application. what I've actually done is I've just built a list of them right quick. So I'm actually watching the communications that are being launched from this application and archiving them. So in this example, rather than having someone have to go over to Outlook and search for a conversation that they had about general industries, I've integrated them directly into the app so I can show all the conversations that have been launched about this particular account. And maybe if I wanted to, I could add recording and archiving for compliance or just for historical purposes. And here what I've done is I've just actually taken the direct XML representation of the conversation as far as the participants and the subject and so on and so forth, and just written it out just so you can see that I have full access to the conversation from an object model standpoint. Right? And if you look at the code that's associated with that, or code from the OCOM model, you can see that let me bring up the task list. You can see that I can register for an event like conversation removed, so I know whenever a conversation is started by my application or it's removed from the active conversation list via this event, it passes in a type called Conversation Manager Event Args, which actually supports or exposes the conversation itself. And I have access to the conversation history just by saying .history, right? Again, the full object model of conversation, modalities, participants, contacts, groups, so on, via the application. Okay? So let's go back over here and let's start talking about the server side. So server-side scenarios that we heard from folks was things along the lines of, I want to provide some sort of self-service application. So I want to provide like a voice or an IM-based application that gives people access to data, gives people access to the right people at the right time, being able to ask a few quick questions and connect them to people like a web click-to-chat or a web click-to-call scenario, something along those lines. In fact, the other day, I had a great example of this. A friend and I bumped into each other on Microsoft campus, and we were talking about a problem that we were trying to solve with this project that we were working on. And we decided that we wanted to get the team together very quickly. And curiosity-wise, how many folks here have an executive assistant? OK, so one guy. Congratulations. And not many of us do. And because having a person that is my executive assistant and paying that salary and stuff like that's fairly expensive. But it would have been really nice if I needed that meeting room. I could have just picked up the phone and said, hey, I need a meeting room. I'm walking over to building 24. Could you find me one and book it, and then just call me back and let me know what it is? Right? But Microsoft's not going to pay for me to have a person that just sits there and books my meetings and finds important email and stuff like that. But a common scenario that we hear from folks all the time is, hey, I want to create a personal virtual assistant, right, that is either IM-based or voice-based. It's a contact and communicator, right, and kind of does these common scenarios for them, like finds conference rooms or lets them know when a particular document is checked into SharePoint, something along those lines, okay? Or the web click-to-chat scenario. I want people to be able to click on my website. I'm going to have them fill out some information via IM about, what their question is and so on. I'm going to use that information along with what page they were on. I'm going to use that information to find someone that's online that can answer that question and put those two calls together, right? So the person with the right skills can help the customer and hopefully make a buy decision. Things along those lines. The other scenario that we hear quite a bit is I've got this business process and some event happens and I need a human being to actually sign off on something or do something. And I want to be able to use their presence, and if they're online, I'm going to send them an IM. If they're away, I'm going to call their cell phone. Whatever it takes to reach those people as quickly as possible and kind of unlock the business process based on that human interaction. Okay, so let's look at an example of that. I'm actually going to go through that personal virtual assistant example. All right, so I'm looking for that conference room. My buddy Rui and I were walking from building to building. We're walking over to building 34, and we need to book a conference room, right? And rather than one of us sitting down on a park bench and opening our laptop and da-da-da-da-da to try and find a conference room, voice is a much better application of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close this solution and open another one. Let me start up this application. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to place this call via communicator. But of course, since OCS can be connected to the PSTN via media gateways or SIP trunking and so on, it's very easy to do this via cell phone or whatever, just to make the demo as easy as possible. So I'm going to start up my application, which lives behind a particular contact. All right, and as soon as my application starts up here, there's the endpoint, and the platform's now started. So here's my contact. This is my personal virtual assistant. Microsoft won't shell out for an executive assistant until I reach like the VP level or whatever. But this is a very scalable and very cost-effective way to help me get things done very quickly, just like being able to call somebody and say, hey, book this conference room for me. So let me call this app. I'm going to mute the mic just so I can talk over it and kind of do a little color commentary, right?
Welcome to the conference room concierge. I can book a conference room for you. Please enter your 5-digit PIN. PIN accepted. Thank you. Which building would you like to find a conference room?
Okay, and we're outside 34.
People will be in the meeting.
Okay, and there's going to be 6 people in the meeting.
Whiteboard?
Looks like we're having a little bit of quality issues. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to start this again. I've got a server running over in the speaker room. And just to make sure you guys can hear it, let me just restart this. So application is now started. Let's call my personal virtual assistant again.
Welcome to the conference room concierge. I can book a conference room for you. Please enter your 5-digit PIN. PIN accepted. Thank you. Which building would you like to find a conference room in?
Okay, I'm outside building 34, and there's 6 people on my team. Yeah, I could speak to it, but sometimes that's kind of difficult to do when you're on a microphone and so on. So 6 people on my team.
Board?
I need a whiteboard.
A projector.
And I need a projector.
I found some conference rooms
This
matching
is actually
your
just going out to
criteria.
Exchange and finding me conference rooms that are available over the next hour that meet my criteria, building 34.
Conference room 1, 2009, PM.
You can see here we're having a little bit of network issues. I think at the PDC we've got some heavy network users.
At 12 o'clock p.m. Option 3.
So let me just book that second conference room that supports to me. All right, you can see here it's booked the conference room for me. Okay? So a great example, and if I open this up, I can see it within Outlook, and then it books a conference room based on the new conference room features in Exchange. I did that all via my voice. And it's really an easy application. I could sit there with my cell phone, and Rui and I could be walking over to building 34, and I could just be either talking to the application. We support, of course, text-to-speech and speech recognition, or I could be just doing quick DTMF tones to go through it, right? And if you think about getting everybody in your company an executive assistant is pretty expensive, but getting everybody a personalized virtual assistant to do these common tasks via voice or via IM is really pretty cost effective. So how did I develop that application? Well, I developed it using the UCMA 3.0 workflow activities. So the server-side API for OCS is the Unified Communications Managed API. We've built a workflow API on top of that, so you can build Windows workflows that execute on either an inbound or an outbound call, right? And those calls support the modalities of IM or voice, right? Either using text-to-speech and speech recognition or DTMF tones, as I had done in that last demo. So for IM, you can support IM prompts and menus like, hey, select option 1, select option 2, and so on and so forth. Collecting the information that your application needs. For voice, you can use text-to-speech and recorded prompts. Like the recorded prompts that we actually did in that application, we just gave somebody a USB headset and had them actually just record all the prompts according to the script that we built with our application. So very, very easy to do. You don't have to hire an actor or anything along those lines. The speech recognition is based on SRGS, so defining the actual grammar associated with your app. So hey, I'm going to ask them what buildings they're associated with. I'm going to build a dynamic grammar based on the rooms that are available. So I'll know that they've selected a valid choice based on the choices they had given them. Okay? And we support this full prompt engine, so you can have a very natural conversation. So you can ask them a question. If they need help, they can select a prompt like a help prompt, and it'll play a help prompt to explain the option a little bit more. So first-time users. There's prompts that you can use for, hey, I didn't understand your input, or the input that you gave me doesn't match the grammar I've defined, and so on and so forth. So you can have that. If you've used voice-based applications in the past, provide them a well-designed API to kind of help them through the process of using your application to the point where they can just say yes, no, whiteboard, blah, and just get through it. Okay? So there's activities for presence, for call control, disconnecting calls, being able to transfer calls, and so on. And the great thing about this API is that it's very, very easy. If you've done Windows workflow work in the past, or even if you haven't, it's very easy to pick up. It's a workflow that's based either on that outbound call that your application makes or an inbound call to your application contact, like I did in the demo. The nice thing about it is it's built on UCMA Core 3.0, so you can take the underlying libraries of Core and use that to extend and create custom activities. Like we support blind transfer out of the box. What if you want to do consultative transfer? You can build that just by creating a custom activity. Okay? So we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm actually not going to go through and show you that SDK. It's available now in the 2.0 version. The big difference that we've made, or the big change that we've made going from 2.0 to 3.0 is that we're supporting the underlying 3.0 capabilities through custom activities. So let's instead switch over and talk about server-side communications or extending OCS communications via the UCMA 3.0 Core SDK. So a quick demo to show that. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to show a demo that we shipped with 2.0 and then talk about how it's different, show a couple of quick code examples of how it's different with UCMA 3.0. So let me close the solution and open another. And what I've got is I've got a help desk application. So when users call into my help desk, I have a bot that actually answers them either via speech or IM to collect enough information that I know what queue the call needs to go in. And then based on both presence information as well as skills-based information or application data, like who can help with these kind of questions, then I route that call or put it in a queue so someone can answer it. And then I have features above and beyond that to help the help desk technicians do things like conference each other in to get help with a particular issue they don't particularly have the expertise to solve, and so on. So let's look at an example of that. I'm going to go ahead and start the application. Sean is a help desk technician. I'm going to make him busy, so I'm simulating that he's actually already on a call. And same thing with Rebecca. Okay, so I'm going to mark her as busy as well. Okay, and I'm going to go over to this third session that I have open. And this is Rebecca. This is the person that needs help. Okay, so she's got this application contact called the Help Desk Concierge. And just to make the demo easy, I'll do this via IM, just because it's easier to show some of the concepts like back-to-back and trusted user conference or trusted conference user and so on. So I'm going to IM the application. And it's like, help. And the application comes back and says, okay, welcome to the Help Desk Concierge. What operating system are you using? I am, of course, using Windows 7 rocks. And I'm using Word 2010. And it says, okay, please hold for the next available agent. Your call will be answered in the order that it was received, right? So I could be in a meeting and doing this, like getting the help that I need while other folks are blah, 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 right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to mark Sean as available. He's in the queue to help for Windows and Word. Okay, and you can see he gets invited to the call. It says, do you want to accept a call about Windows Word? Yeah, that's my job, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. And you can see here that I am conferenced into a call. I'm Sean with Holly. Right? And if we go over to Holly's machine, you can see that we've actually created what's called a back-to-back call. So rather than just transferring the call from the help desk application over to the help desk engineer, we've actually got two calls that are back-to-back to provide anonymization, right? So if you look over here, Holly sees that she's in a call with the help desk concierge, right? So there's a couple of cool things going on there. One is I had a contact that was an application, not a person. So I can automate a lot of the processes around skills-based routing or presence-based routing and so on. That application was publishing presence, so it looks like a regular contact within Communicator, so people know that, hey, the help desk concierge is online, available to help me, right? The help desk concierge application not only knew who to route that call from based on skills, but it was also consuming presence of the different contacts that have those skills. So I'm using presence subscriptions in order to say, okay, Sean's online. I know I can transfer the call to him, right? So I can be in this call with Holly and chat back and forth with her, right? And she gets the message back. Okay, and they can have this conversation to the point where, let's say that Sean is fairly new to the help desk and he doesn't know how to help Holly. Well, one of the things that we can do is not only is this a back-to-back call that's providing that anonymization, so Sean's talking to Holly, but Holly just thinks she's talking to the help desk concierge. But we've also got the application that's sitting there in the middle as what we would call a trusted conference user. So there's this special user that's conferenced into the call that is only there. It's there. It's invisible. It's only there to actually provide value or to do kind of this executive assistant stuff to Sean. So imagine I had an executive assistant and I'm on a call with a customer and I can say, I can cover the phone and say, go get Rebecca because she's the only one that knows how to do this and get her in here now. And that person would run out and go get Rebecca and bring her in. Well, that's an example of what these trusted conference users can do. They can actually listen on the line, and you can talk to them in a way that other people on the phone can't hear them, or other people in the conversation can't hear them, and they can just sit there and do your bidding. So let's look at an example of that. I don't know how to answer this call, right? So what I want to do is I want to bring in someone else that has the skills that I need that can help me. So I'm going to sit there and say CMD escalate skills equals Windows. And maybe if I want to do this with voice, I could do like pound, and then I could say a command, and that trusted conference user could be listening for those commands, and no one else would hear it, just that particular trusted conference user. So I can say CMD escalate skills Windows, right? And Rebecca has those skills, so I'm going to make her online. And watch what happens. She gets invited into the call. Okay, so she gets invited into the call. You can see that she can see that Holly and Sean are in this call. She knows that Sean's fairly new, so she can help. She knows that she's there to help him. You can see that Sean can see that Rebecca is now in the call. If we go over to Holly's instance of the call, you can see that she still thinks it's just her and the help desk conversation, or the help desk concierge, right? So not only they're anonymized, but there's this other person that's on the call. So I can use another command, CMD message, but maybe on a voice call I'm doing pound, and then talking just to these people in the private conversation. All right, so if I do preface the IM with CMD message, and I go over to Rebecca, you can see that she gets that private message. And so on and so forth, until they get to the point where Sean can say, okay, Holly, here's what you do, right? And if I go over to Holly's machine, you can see she's none the wiser to that conversation, right? Okay, so how did I do that? Let me go ahead and stop this application, and let's talk about some of the things that are both new and as well as easier within UCMA 3.0. Okay, so UCMA 3.0 is the managed API that you can use to build these server-side communication solutions. So personal virtual assistants, communication-enabled business processes. In UCMA 1.0, we essentially provided a SIP stack, a managed SIP stack. So you could do session handling and IM. 2.0, we added voice. We moved a lot of features up the stack, so made connection management much easier. Added voice, added publication and subscription, and so on, as well as conferencing. In 3.0, we're adding a lot of features as far as exposing features with fewer lines of code. So automatic provisioning is something that you could do with a lot of WMI code in UCMA 2.0. We're actually building this into UCMA 3, making it much easier to bring new endpoints online and offline in your collaboration platform without you having to have a lot of WMI event code in there. Publication of presence as well as the consumption of presence is much easier within this version. You used to have to do a lot of XML work, pushing XML down the pipe and consuming XML on the way back. We've up-leveled that to be more managed code. Making it better, doing back-to-back calls is much easier within this version. We've got some new call type, or the new ability to do service-based calls. So I have a call for trusted conference user abilities that this call is only there to service these private commands from the call owner. Like we had just seen those whisper commands and the ability to conference people in without the end user knowing. So that trusted conference user scenario is much easier. We support new authentication and impersonation features. So you have the ability to authenticate yourself with a PIN when you call into an application. That authentication actually goes to OCS, so it can associate your account within AD with the application, so the application can do things on your behalf with impersonation. In fact, let's go over and actually look at an example of that. Let's go to the demo machine. Let me stop this particular application and kill all these calls. Okay, and let me just kill this right quick and go over, kind of running out of time, so let me figure out which is the, oh, I'm sorry. I clicked the button and it must not have taken. Okay, there we go. So let me go over here. I'm going to close that solution. Let me open up, probably the trusted conference user is the most interesting thing to show. So let's do this. What I've got is when you create these trusted conference users, essentially what you're doing is you're taking the application endpoint, and that application endpoint is the kind of the center of the call. That's the endpoint that manages the call and provides services. And one of the things that it can do is it can conference in this other user, right, with a dedicated call for some service. Like if you want to have a dedicated call to record and archive the conversation, or if you want to have a dedicated call to a service endpoint, and all that service endpoint does is sits there and waits for commands to transfer in other users or provide a whisper command. So certain people on the call can talk back and forth and other people can't hear it, and so on. Well, I can do that with this trusted user conference concept. So I can sit there and I can create my application endpoint, right? I can create another endpoint, which is this TCU endpoint, the one that provides the service. All right, so I can create a new conversation on my app endpoint, and I'll call that TCU conversation. I can create a new conference session, which again will give me that conference opportunity to conference in that other endpoint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dedicated service call that only takes DTMF inputs, there you go, to that endpoint, and only supports audio coming back. So I can sit there and do things like pound and tell that endpoint to do something, and maybe it's going to like go find me a conference room or conference someone in or something along those lines. Okay? I'll create a new audio video MCU session. That's actually the session that I'll use to attach those service calls to. And then when I specify the conference join options, I can specify a join mode of trusted participant. Now this gives that endpoint certain rights and privileges, right, to act on my behalf. It also shows up as an invisible contact within the call, and so on. When I establish that call, I can actually create, I can tell it that I don't want the default incoming and outgoing audio routes, so I don't want the default call routes as far as the media as that gets transferred between that endpoint. I can specify my own. So I'm going to create an incoming audio route that's DTMF enabled, and then a standard outgoing route. And then when I create that service call, based on those audio routes, now I have this endpoint that's on my that's conferenced into my call that looks invisible to all the other participants, and I can use that dedicated call that only supports DTMF inputs, right, and supports regular audio outputs just directly to that one user or the other users in that conference. So I can sit there and say, pound, conference in Rebecca, and it can whisper back to me or say back to me, conferencing in Rebecca, and only I would hear that. The other people, like my other users on the call, wouldn't hear that. So it's a very, very powerful medium for providing these personal virtual assistants or providing value add on top of just a regular call. You can have an application that's on that call providing services to the owner of the call, okay? And that's trusted conference user. So we are running out of time. With Exchange 2010, there's a lot of cool things going on. One of the coolest things that we've supported or added to the 2010 timeframe is this new Exchange Web Services Managed API. So if you used Exchange Web Services in the past, you know that it gives you access to both the data, so everything that's in the mailbox, as well as the business logic. So features that you might have associated with Outlook in the past, like the free busy scheduler, getting access to free busy time for 10 different contacts, and being able to schedule conferences, schedule meetings and so on. That business logic, you know that EWS supports that as a web services API. Well, the new Exchange Web Services Managed API takes that protocol-based API and layers managed code on top of that to make it very, very approachable and discoverable, so you can create some very, very sophisticated Exchange solutions on top of Exchange 2010. It also supports 2007, so there's some great future proofing there. If you're on 2010 building solutions, you can add 2010 features when you move to 2010 without deploying a new library. It also supports the cloud as well, so you can just tell it, hey, I want to talk to this mailbox. And if that mailbox is up in the cloud, it'll find the client access server for that particular mailbox and so on. So there's actually an entire talk on this. Jason Henderson is a fantastic PM of the Exchange Web Services team. He's doing an entire talk on this at lunch on Thursday. So I'll let him cover the API just so we have plenty of time for questions here on the end. But if you think about that, conference room finder application, that was a voice UI on top of Exchange Web Services and the new Exchange 2010 meeting room features. So that's how we developed that API. So roadmap, here's what we're doing. We're actually getting started with our early adopter programs now. Exchange Web Server was released last week, so was the EWS Managed API. In the Q1 timeframe of next year, we're actually going to start up doing the training and architectural discussions with people in the early adopter program, that UC14 Metro program. And we're looking at releasing 14 in the late 2010. So what is the Metro program? Well, it is the early adopter program for these technologies. So for OCS 14, OC 14, and then all the SDKs. So what's your commitment? Well, your commitment is to put an NDA in place. So of course, you can't talk about these bits. We give you access to them months before they're publicly available. So we want to make sure that we have one of these bidirectional NDAs. So we know that the bits aren't going to be shared publicly. We also ask that you have a project scoped and planned, so you're actually building something as part of the program. The benefits that you get, of course, early access to the bits, as I had mentioned, so months before they're even publicly available. Technical briefings, we train your developers on the SDKs. We'll do technical briefings with you to discuss your architecture, provide you guidance and so on, and then support while you're building something to make sure you're successful with the bits. So how do you get nominated? If you've got someone that you normally work with at Microsoft, please talk to them about the program. Say, hey, I want to be in the Unified Communications Metro program. They can nominate you. If you don't know who that person is, write down this email or grab it from the slides. It's Metro REQ or Metro Requests at Microsoft.com. Send a mail there. Provide us details about your company and about the project that you're thinking about, and we'll find the right person in Microsoft to nominate you and work with you through this program. During the keynote this morning, folks, Ozzy talked about Microsoft Pinpoint. We're one of the first adopters of Pinpoint. So if you've got a solution built on the UC stack and you'd like to add it to the catalog, either something you have now or something you build through UC 14 Metro, it's a great opportunity to help people find your unified communications solution, essentially giving you an opportunity to reach more customers. So fantastic new program that Ray was talking about this morning. Resources here at the PDC, we have 2 more sessions. PR4, Integrating and Extending Microsoft Office Communicator Experience with WPF and Silverlight is, I'm sorry, it's PR13. I'm sorry, I have the wrong session number. So PR13, it's tomorrow at 11:30. You can find it in the session guide. We're actually going to take a deep dive on the new client-side APIs. So what you can do with the controls as well as the underlying managed API. And then PR30 is the exchange session at lunch on Thursday. And again, a fantastic opportunity to learn how you can leverage Exchange within your own applications. We've got some other links there for the UC portal and then my blog. And then finally, we've got some opportunities that everyone, definitely we've got at least 200 copies, and I think this room fits like 200 people. So we've got plenty of copies of this book, the Programming Unified Communications book. It takes you through the current 2.0 platform, or R2 platform end to end. If you'd like a copy of that book, there's some folks standing in the back of the room, and as you exit, they're going to give you one of these little cards that you can snap with your phone and take down to the booth and get a free copy of this book. Okay? Yay, everybody loves free stuff. Okay, so I promised you few slides, maybe too many demos, and so on. But hopefully you learned some really cool stuff that we're doing in the 14 wave. Again, the opportunity to extend and integrate either on the client side or on the server side or with Exchange data. So I hope you guys have an awesome PDC. Please fill out your evals. We want your feedback as well as we want an opportunity to give some great money to give some money to a great organization like the Boys and Girls Club of LA. And I will be up here for questions throughout the lunch hour. So if you have any questions, come and see me. But otherwise, have a great PDC, and I'll see you guys in the booth and around in sessions and stuff. Thanks very much.